And we're back. It's so good to have you on today's show. Folks, we have Ariel Frailich, a friend of mine from TO, from Toronto, and I'm so pleased and honored that you've agreed to come on the show this day.
Thank you, Michael, and great honor for me to be here. Thank you.
Right off the bat, and I'm not just saying this to be nice, I think you know me, you should know me, but I love this. This is one of your many products, and it's turned transparent in a magic fit. And I bought this recently from your website. I saw that.com. And I love it. I love it for so many reasons. I'm going to talk as if we're talking to lay people as well as magicians. So I won't be too specific to give things away and all that. But I have to say the way it was written is even better than the kind of instructions and booklets that I grew up with in Montreal from the magic shops and the shops in TO as well. Because all we had back then were written instructions. We didn't have videos. We didn't have a lot of things. We had books, incredible magic books that are still around. We had manuscripts to learn tricks. And I came across this because it sounded intriguing. I think I saw something on Facebook about it. I don't know. So I thought I'll order it. And it exceeded my expectations. And I want you to share, if you want, Ariel, why your website is so different and your approach to magic and writing magic is so different.
Thank you, certainly. Regarding tricks, when I started my magic business in 1995, I put out a number of tricks. The very first thing I did was a book called Card Stories. And after that, I came out with a few tricks. So let's leave the books for a bit later. My tricks, including the one you have, my view on being a dealer, a magic dealer of props as opposed to books, was based on what I knew of Ken Brook. I actually met Ken Brook once. I went to a shop in London, but I didn't spend much time there. But of course, he was legendary. Ken Brook did a number of things that no other dealer did. And one of the things he did was provide instructions that were absolutely extraordinary. And that appealed to me because I very much believe in quality and in giving people their money's worth, because I know what it's like to buy what you talked about earlier, a trick with a single sheet typewritten and not very well reproduced. I know what that's like. I spent hundreds of dollars. I mean, I never spent a penny on that. Okay, I bought many of those, of course. And I wanted to do something better. Also, at that time, I had gotten into learning about, story magic, really. It was new to me, and that overlaps the books, of course. I used to be an expert card hand. I used to be the young fiddly guys of the day. And I was quite good at it, but I also had no presentation, and I was aware of that. And I left magic for a while. When I came back to it, instead of going to the card books, instead of going to Marlowe, I found myself more drawn to Eugene Berger. It was my first introduction to this new way of looking at things. Then I came across René Lavant, fell in love with what he did. The stories, the tricks were good, but it was about his approach, his presentation. And finally, German magician Punks, who's not very well known, but very important figure in theatrical magic. And between the three of those, I found my voice and my direction, finally. And it was story magic, which I wasn't aware of before. But when I say story magic, I'm not talking about the old-fashioned card tricks where you do a lot of dealing, you tell a long drawn-out story, and there isn't much at the end. It's boring.
Yes.
I'm talking about, hard-hitting contemporary card magic told with a story that's bang, 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 bang. And it's very, very different. From that, I wrote my book, Card Stories, when I discovered this new path, where I present, as I said, contemporary strong card magic with stories. And then when I started doing tricks, I wanted to carry that over. So with Spin the Bottle, I went to the trouble of finding different presentations. I wanted, a full humorous, standard close-up style presentation. I wanted a bizarre presentation because I have a taste for bizarre magic. And I also wanted a mentalism presentation. I didn't feel capable of doing that, so I asked somebody else to come up with one. And he did, but to be honest, the trick doesn't really lend itself well to a mentalism presentation. But yeah, it has 3 presentations in the booklet, and not only the main effect, but 1 or 2 additional effects. And from the technical point of view, what I claim to be the best instruction in the business.
And rightfully
Shamelessly.
so. Rightfully, no.
Thank you.
No,
So it's a little trick, 16 pages.
but how entertaining is it? I just went over it again before we started, because lately it's one of my favorite books. And again, it looks a little bit transparent because of chroma key. But one of the things I love about the effect is that it lends itself to close-up. It lends itself to parlor magic or platform magic, which is very popular nowadays. And it's a little bit more visual in that regard. And the fact that one uses a prop, I'm not going to give anything away, one uses a prop as part of the effect or the presentation, and which ends up being important in the end. That's all I'm going to say to our revelation. And so I love that. I love using extra props or props that enhance an effect without taking away. And by the way, I have a love of Eugene Berger's works as well, and whatnot. And I love the simplicity of his stuff. I suspect, and I'd like some feedback on this. Do you think as we, I want to say as we grow older, as we grow younger, perhaps, maybe we're doing away with extra props we don't need anymore, and we're down to the basic magic, doing magic with just a few simple things. Do you think there's any value to that statement? How has your journey kind of lent itself to that?
Well, I can't speak for other magicians, obviously. In my own case, well, I've always been a bit of a purist, and the reason for that was more out of fear. What if I don't? What if I lose? What if it breaks? So my stuff was from day one almost entirely sleight of hand.
Yes.
There's a very, very few props that I use. I had some coins, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I gave them away. I just use regular coins. And with cards, there's very little I found that was really worth doing or keeping that I couldn't do with an ordinary deck.
Yes.
So,
My next purchase from you is going to be an effect. It's actually a subtlety or a technique called Subrosa. And can we speak a little bit about that without giving anything away?
Sure. So Subrosa is an old technique, and I can say it's a switch. It's a secret switch. But the beauty of it is that it's completely above board. Nobody would ever guess that you're doing a switch, not even magicians. And it doesn't matter how closely you watch, you cannot see the switch because there is nothing to see. It's very unusual in that it's not a move, it's not a sleight, it's a method that piggybacks onto a natural action. That much I can say. And what I've done is I've taken this technique, which comes from cheating, by the way, and which is at least 100 years old, probably closer to 150 years old. And a lot of magicians know it, but few people have explored what you can do with it. So the beauty of the book, Subrosa, by the way, I gave the technique a name because it didn't have one. It was always described as you do this, you do that, but nobody ever gave the name. So I gave the name Subrosa. The beauty of the book is not the technique. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but what you can do with it. I came up with 60 or 70 tricks, which are described in the book. And, it's a little bit more than scratching the surface, but it opens up possibilities. Every reviewer who looked at the book said the same thing. Great book, great ideas, great tricks, great premises. But the best thing about it is that it'll open your mind to coming up with your own stuff, your own tricks, your own presentations using it.
Absolutely.
And I think that is indeed the case.
Absolutely. And for me, that's one of the most useful, one of the best things about a technique or a gimmick, or in your case of Subrosa, is that it lends itself. So when someone is buying the manuscript or buying the book or buying the ebook, if you will, they're not just getting a method. They're getting something that they may use for the rest of their lives. They may use in a number, not only of styles of magic, but I noticed, because I cheated, I read a little bit about it on your website. It lends itself to mentalism. It lends itself to card magic. It lends itself to so many things. And I think that's worth $1 million. How do you put a price tag on that?
Yeah, I have to agree. I suppose I should pull it out. So this is Subrosa.
Yes, yes. And not just out of sheer curiosity, but because for me, when I saw that and when I read we call it in advertising, the copy, when we were reading the write-up, if you will, of it, it's like a door opened up. That's how it seemed to me. And it's like, whoa, there will be miles of usage for me personally, in that subtlety or technique, if you will. I choose to call it. I choose to call it a technique. And I'm excited about it. You've paid me nothing. This isn't an endorsement, a paid endorsement. It's something, that really grabbed me. And that's why I'm hoping to share it with our listening and viewing audience out there, because this will be a podcast as well. I noticed as well, besides your own things such as Subrosa and the spin the bottle effect, you've got reading, writing. You've got the Lives of a Showman. I believe it's Mark Lewis's memoirs, if you will, Wit and Wizardry. Working the tables. I assume it's for restaurant and close-up magic. I think I did see that. Performing magic for children, which I did for many years and had a kid show on TV. And on the other side of the mirror, do any of those titles grab you? Do you want to maybe share a little bit about anything that stood out?
Performing Magic for Children is a book, a bit of a sleeper, I guess. It really covers everything there is to know about performing magic for children. Of course, the fact that the title is mundane doesn't help, but then again, I couldn't come up with a title that better reflects the breadth of what this book does. There have been professionals, big names in kid show magic, not David Ginn, others, who wrote to me privately to say, I wish I had this book 25 years ago. It would have saved me a lot of heartache. This book is absolutely incredible because it starts, well, it's written by two ECEs, early childhood education specialists.
Yes.
One of whom runs an orphanage. And they talk about the psychological aspect of what it means for children to watch a magic performance, what they get out of it, what they need to get out of it, and the role of the magician in that context, or rather from that point of view. Yes. So it is absolutely an amazing book. I took one look at it and I knew right away, this is gold, even though I don't do kid shows. Yeah. You just knew that it's fantastic. It really covers everything. It not only tells you the what, but the why. There's very little out there. Even today, from what I understand, I don't really follow kid show magic books, but I believe that even today there is very little written that has that depth.
So I would personally highly recommend it to any kid show magicians out there, even if you're a seasoned pro, what we call a seasoned pro. And I'm sure you'll find something that you either didn't think of, or maybe it's confirming something that you have been doing in your show. That was the case with me and David Ginn years ago. I'd already been doing kid shows a couple of years. I came across one of David Ginn's books, and it's like, holy cow, I'm actually doing something right. So, at least according to him. And I want to emphasize how it's a specialty thing. A lot of magicians, I don't know why that's the case. I think you know what I'm about to say. For some reason, a lot of magicians, working pros, they won't do kid shows, or they look down their nose at it, or they think, oh, whatever, you're not a real magician if you do kid shows. Well, let me tell you, as you know, and as people making a living from kid shows, I bought 2 houses in Winnipeg because of the kid shows I did, the amount of kid shows I did. It's a whole other skill. It's a whole other psychology. It's a whole other, approach to our art of magic. And I'm so thankful when I saw that title amongst your other titles. I thought, you know what? This is going to be a winner. This is going to be a little bit a cut above, a little bit more than a cut above anything that's out there in regards. And there's a lot of good kids books. I'm not putting down, kid show performers or the books they've written and all that. They're all awesome. But I know otherwise you wouldn't have included this in your group. You wouldn't have published this if it wasn't special. And I urge people, even if they're just thinking of getting into performing magic for kids, grab this book before you grab any other books. Maybe you already have some books, but grab this one. It'll be, again, well worth your money and worth 1,000 times whatever this costs. I know that to be true. And so with kid shows, you either, and I hope you'll agree with me on this, you either love kids or you don't. So you have to love kids if you're going to do kid shows. Otherwise, don't bother. And that's okay, because we can't all be kid show magicians. We can't all be family entertainers, if you will. And now family entertainer just means you're not saying anything dirty. Yeah. But really, family entertainment for me was kids and their parents. And adults, so it's a whole other thing. Don't get into performing for kids unless you love kids. Don't do it for the money, because you're going to be sadly disappointed. And kids are so cool. They're so honest. If they don't like you, you'll know it right at the beginning. They call the shots. They'll call you on stuff. Yeah. You think you're so good at misdirection. The other kids, they're way ahead of the game already. They know the score. And so if you love kids, perform for kids. If you don't love kids, don't bother. Perform for adults, mixed audiences, whatever. And this book will help if you're already performing or thinking of performing. And with kids, it can't be ego. You can't be coming from a place of, because they'll tear you down right away. They'll cut you down to their size, and rightfully so. So I'm so grateful and thankful that you have this book, Performing Magic for Children. You feel good about talking about briefly working the tables? I'm assuming it's restaurant magic, and
I'll be happy to talk about anything. And by the way, I want to say about Performing Magic for Children, it's not excellent because I published it. I published it because it's excellent.
Yes.
I was given the choice of a number of books from German authors, and this one is written by 2 German authors. And I took a look at this one right away. I knew, oh my God, this has to be made available here. Working the Tables, that was David Drake's book. David Drake was a working professional, full-time professional here in Toronto, and he did some very original magic, close-up magic. I think he did some platform as well, but mostly he did close-up magic, restaurants, etc. And he put together a small book of his some of his routines, and he asked me to sell it for him. So that's that. That's Working the Tables. I do have a very interesting quick anecdote, if I may, about David Drake.
Of course.
And he was called up by the CBC to do something with his rabbit, and then they decided that they would use the rabbit, but not David. So they did, and they paid him for the use of the rabbit. So they paid the rabbit, essentially.
I love it. I love it. You know what? We're always upstaged by the rabbit or the kid.
Absolutely.
And rightfully
Absolutely.
so. And rightfully so.
And rightfully so.
I use it brings back memories of when I used to raise rabbits, believe it or not. It's not very hard to raise them, by the way. You know, you just if you manage to get a little boy, a little male and female bunny, before you know it, you're raising rabbits. But the kids loved those. I'm only speaking from my personal experience. Versus the doves, the kids seem to be a little bit scared of doves. What I would do is, when I first started, I'd produce doves, and here's Yoinkel Schmeckel with his dove. I've produced the dove. The kids wouldn't really want to pet the dove. But when I would change the dove to a bunny, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, they all wanted to pet the bunny and all of this. And I have tons of stories. I won't cut into your time, but everybody loves. I think adults and kids alike. They love bunnies. They love rabbits, and again, livestock. What we call livestock in magic, it's not for everybody as well. So again, unless you're prepared to do a lot of the cleaning and love them and keep them as pets, not as props, don't bother. Don't bother, because they're beautiful living things, and they're not just props in your show without feeling. And but everybody loves bunnies. One New Year's Eve, I remember a show in a hotel, and it was a platform. So drunk females were right at the edge, looking up at me. I produced a bunny, and they went crazy, not just because they were a little tipsy, but they all love rabbits. I'm curious about the Norm Houghton book, Wit and Wizardry. I have no clue. I didn't research it. Maybe you want to share a bit.
Norm Houghton, he was born very early in the 20th century, and he passed away in 1995, 96, 97. He was well in his 80s, if I remember well. He came up with and submitted tricks to magazines all across the English-speaking world. A lot of them in Abra, some in the Gen. There are a number of them in the old Encyclopedia of Card Tricks, the Jean Newgard book under a different name, Lauren de Blois. Ibidem, the famous underground card magazine. Linking Ring, of course. Anyway, over 60 years, dozens and dozens and dozens of effects. So he was very much an underground figure, behind the scenes, not so much underground, but behind the scenes person. The only people who knew Norm were locals and people who attended conventions, especially the 4F conventions back in the early days. Who had met him in person. Otherwise, nobody had ever heard of them except those who read the magazine or the articles, the tricks he published. So at some point, David Ben, I think, came up with the idea of collating or compiling rather Norm's magic into a book. Things happened, and he sat on half of what came the book and didn't do anything with it. When I put out Card Stories, I was a new publisher. That was my first book. And of course, I've known David Ben for ages, and David approached me and said, how about you do a book on Norm's output? So I accepted, and between Tom Ransom, well, mostly Tom Ransom, helped me to compile the rest of the material, and so we put it all together and made a book out of it. It's almost entirely Norm's own. No, it is entirely Norm's own words. He was an editor, So he knew something about writing English, and I mean professionally. And so yeah, it's a really cool book of really novel, unusual, offbeat effects, uh, mostly with very humorous presentations. To give you an example, I was very poor when I was young. I couldn't afford a deck of cards, so I only bought one card. But as time went on, I bought a second card, a third card, until finally I got a full deck. That's typical of Norm's way out, offbeat way of doing things.
I love it. I love it.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And the material is amazing. I had known Norm for what, a good 20 years by that time. And I had no idea that he came up with all those things. They're simple, straightforward, unusual, offbeat, clever. It's an amazing collection too.
Wit and wizardry. Wit and wizardry. So that's, oh, if you happen to have it as well, that would be so cool.
Wit and wizardry.
Ah, very cool. Very cool. I'm telling you, we can go on and should go on, but time limits.
Okay.
Time limits. And so let's say folks want to get in touch with you. I mean, I've been kind of hinting at the website isawthat.com, but you're also available on social media.
Yes, I'm on Facebook. I Saw That Magic. I think just do a search for I Saw That Magic. It may be under the name IST Magic in the URL, but just look for I Saw That Magic.
Very good.
And I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn, but that's not really what that's best for.
Yes.
But I'm certainly easy to connect with.
Excellent. Excellent. You're a veritable storehouse, a wealth, if you will, of I'm going to say unlimited magic information. And I know this is just a small representation of your knowledge and what you have to give and offer others. I'm so grateful you came and joined us this day, Ariel. I can't thank you enough.
And I thank you again. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Michael.
It's an honor to have you as well. And I want to thank all of you out there who are watching. And welcome everybody to Magical People. This week we have my very special guest, Chris Herren as Faust. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good, Dr. Leike. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to get into a great conversation with you. It's always a good conversation with you. But, oh, by the way, Happy New Year, Dr. Leike.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well. I have to say that from the very first time I saw you perform, and I think that was actually thanks to Anthony Darkstone and the Society of American Magicians International Assembly, of which we're members, that I got to see you perform. I believe that's so. And I have to tell you, very few performers for me have touched off that magical, whimsical, almost childlike perspective that I believe all of us have. Sometimes we forget. And really, I'm not just trying to say nice things. I really mean this. You've bridged the gap between theater and real magic with your character, Faust.
Well, thank you so much. That's the thing. I didn't plan it to be that way, and I don't think that we do. I think the journey of magic begins with what do I see magic as, or how do I see myself expressing magic. And I think Eugene Berger had once said, "What do you want your magic to be?" And that always resonated to me. And for years, Dr. Likey, I never knew what it was. And I guess, through my life experience, it kind of veered towards theater and to be able to tell a story, and an authentic story that expressed my how I felt and how I viewed the world. So I wouldn't say that I planned it that way, but I knew that that was a format that I needed to use to bring my story and bring my expression across.
Awesome. When I was researching you, and I research a little bit of my guests, I basically go to their website and look at stuff that grabs me. And what grabbed me was the fact that you wrote a thesis creating a magical experience, and it's
Yes.
archived at the Magic Circle Library in London, England. And I have a funny feeling that many people, both magicians and performers and regular people or lay people alike, may be fascinated by that journey, by that story. Did you wish to share that with us?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think that was a question that I always asked. I study under Jeff McBride, and that was the one thing that I explored and studied with him, is this deeper understanding of magic, or what we are supposed to be doing on stage. And through that study, I kind of developed this thesis that surrounds the relationship between the performer and the audience. And I think together, the relationship and the experience between performer and audience creates a magical experience, because no magical experience would exist if it was just a performer performing for himself, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I looked deep into that, and basically the thesis really is establishing this thing we call magical experience, this emotional connection between what's going on up here on stage and what the audience is experiencing out there. And I kind of came up with a formula. And once again, I the idea is not completely authentic, but it jumps on what Jeff McBride had really taught and embedded in me, was that magic is a gift to be given. And I took that concept and I said, well, if magic is a gift to be given to the audience, then if the audience receives that gift, they also give back to the performer. And this sort of circle of giving and receiving between the audience, this connection, and this sort of connection to what's going on and how they perceive it, it begins to create something more than just tricks. And so that was something that I was exploring. But I also knew, Dr. Likey, that I mean, have you ever received a gift where you didn't want to receive it, or because it was coming from someone?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
so I discussed that too. So what is what do you do in those circumstances? Well, I think it's a huge responsibility for the magician to establish that relationship where the audience does receive this sort of magical experience from you. And I go really in depth. And a lot of what I talk about is being able to use your gestures and your movements to communicate to the audience that what I'm performing here is for you. And I do that motion a lot, is to, because the human the human being, before language was even developed, or spoken language was developed, they had already did nonverbal communication, or pantomime. And so everyone, as a human being, understands the movement and communication between something like this, me performing here, and then bringing it over here. It says something. And
Absolutely.
so, and I contribute all these movement and gestures to being able to communicate with the audience that this is for you. This is a gift to you. And if I give something to you, perhaps you might give something back. And this circle that creates a magical experience is developed. So it's more theory, but I think it's practical to look at magic as more than just tricks.
Absolutely. There is a magic, if you will, a real magic that occurs between the performer or the magician, whoever happens to be presenting or giving or sharing, if you will, and the audience. It's a constant, if it's done right, energetic flow. And I'm
Yes.
all about theatrics. I'm all about, because my background, shortly before I went on stage formally as a magician, I was trained by a person who ran a theater company, and he was a taskmaster, but he knew what he was doing from movement and walking on stage. My wife then at the time, he'd mock her. He'd go, "No, don't walk like this. Walk like this." And there was an energy and a lightness about it. And I hope that I've still maintained that kind of movement, esoteric movement, if you will,
Yeah.
and that non-physical communication, which you have captured so well. My wife recently remarked about you because she's crazy about you.
Thank you.
She loves what you do. She loves how you do it. We've seen you a number of times in your stage act, and I think at magic meetings. And what was so cool is she said she's never I want to say participate. I mean, she was watching, but she got drawn in. She said, "You gestured, you did something, and it made her move towards the screen." And she said, no other performer has ever done that for her before.
Thank you. And that's what my thesis really is I don't know everything, and I guess we're all students of this art form, and I'm a student of pantomime as well. And I think that was my whole intention, is that even if we don't know that we're doing it, we are communicating. And magic is just that. It's this communication between you and the audience. And yes, I think with studying under Jeff and studying pantomime, and also you understand, Dr. Likey, that movement is so important. And if you really become aware of it, you realize how powerful it can be. And then combine that with magic and, speaking, it becomes this very powerful instrument. And so I'm glad that your wife, responded in that way, because I don't often get to hear it. But yeah, it's the intention. Although I'm not the magician where I have you pick a card or pick a number, I do think that interaction can still exist if the pantomime is deliberate and is intended to communicate. And so the people will respond even though you're not, doing an interactive, so-called interactive piece. But
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I love the fact, and again, I'm going to speak in terms of metaphysics and esoteria because that's my
Yes,
professional background.
yes.
In addition to performance magic, I studied that for many years. My degrees are in metaphysics. Um, it's the non-physical, the world that's not there that people do respond to, whether they realize it or not.
Yes.
And in all humbleness, I believe that you're a master of it. I mean, that's
Oh,
quite
thank
the word. But I too was drawn in, and I have to speak in those terms that there's a mysticism about. They're going to see just before we come to air this a brief few second video of your silk scarf, your silk handkerchief, and that in itself, there's a flowing of energy and a presenting and a this and a that, and um, some have it and some don't. um, it can be taught mechanically, but you really have it, Chris. You have
oh
that certain something that adds, that puts you, with all due respect, steps, not ahead, but, and I hate to say above, but maybe steps away from other performers.
Thank you.
I mean, we've all enjoyed as performers, as magicians, seeing people come out both at the Magic Castle and on television with those big illusions. And there's something wonderfully choreographed in those big illusions. Hopefully, there's song, there's dance, and
Yes.
there's a little bit of a dance with the physical illusions, which accomplish the magic in the end. But do those physical, those boxes, if you will, which we refer to as boxes, do they really accomplish the magic, or is it the performer?
Yeah, that is absolutely something that I've explored and tried to understand. You know, I think beginning the journey of magic, Dr. Leggy, I had a different perception of how I wanted to present magic. And I was really focused on the tricks, and you know, I think every magician has a room full of magic, and you know, more than what they can really use. And then through time, everything is fitted in this black box. For me, it's just shaved down. And you know, what Jeff McBride had taught me was is that it's not about the tricks. It's your relationship with the tricks, that, or the effects, whatever you want to call them, and being able to find meaning in what you're doing. If it could be the most simplest, and I love taking this most simplest trick, like the knots off silk, that everyone knows, and but trying to find relevancy with me and this thing. How can I, you know, create a relationship with it where it really means something than just me pulling silks off? But that in itself was a journey. But that is why it took so long for me, Dr. Likey, to develop Faust. And I admit, Faust was, it just wasn't born. I had went one direction in a really bizarre, sort of strange, spooky feel and aesthetic, and it just wasn't vibing. The character wanted to become more whimsical. And it took me almost 3 years to really figure out what sort of voice I wanted to give this, and what sort of tricks and how to move with those tricks was a huge exploration. And I think after 3 years, Dr. Like, I really only had a struggling of 15 minutes of material with Faust. And it was so frustrating, but I was patient with it. And you know, and another thing, you mentioned the movement. That in itself, for me, I knew I couldn't do that alone. I needed mentors. With Jeff McBride and also Dan Griffiths, who was a teacher in pantomime, who studied under Marcel Marceau, gave me so many valuable nuggets in terms of movement, things outside of magic, to really hone how do I express a feeling. And I think that's important, to get
Yes.
good teachers. You know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Everybody, somebody once said, and I don't know who it is, somebody once said everybody needs a mentor. If you're lucky enough to have more than one mentor as you grow, that's even better. I believe that there's this saying that was very popular when I arrived at the west coast of Canada: when the student is ready, the mentor, the teacher, the guru appears. And
Yes.
I really believe that there certainly is something to that.
Yeah.
Yet another thing that I admire about you, Chris, is obviously we've probably performed for many different people at many different venues. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, almost to, I guess, to mid 30s, I was still living in the central part of Canada. I noticed that the younger we were, the more props we had.
Yes.
And it's almost as if we depended on these props, that we had to. I know I hid behind magic props or my guitar. I'm also
Yeah.
a musician. And so I felt very comfortable incorporating music, hiding behind my guitar and hiding behind a dove cage or a mismade lady. I've worked with all the huge illusions as well. And all the we'll say older fellows, the older magicians that were part of our shows when we went out to do hospitals and stuff, um, they just had a few props.
Yes.
Yet they could do a half-hour show or 20-minute show just with the linking rings and maybe sponge rabbits. And me, I
Yes.
had like 10 different props or more and effects, and I'm schlepping on my chair suspension, for example, and other
Yeah.
things, and my bow sawing. And this one magician who was in his 70s or 80s, he comes out with nothing. He just has a briefcase. And I'm thinking, I'm getting nervous for him because I'm not getting that concept at that point. I'm thinking,
Yes.
holy cow, we're doing this large venue. What's going to occur here? And
Right.
he had it. But then the question arose as time went on for me, will it take time for me as a person to evolve into that? And
Right.
yet you're relatively young, with all due respect, and you seem to have accomplished that. You don't need massive props, many props to convey messages, to create magic on stage. And I think that's amazing. I really admire that.
Thank you, Dr. Likey. You know, I think we all go through that journey, right? I, I used to do children's magic as a young adult in my teens, and I had everything. I had the sword through head, and um, as I got older, I had the low sander floating table, and you name it, I had it, and I relied on props. I loved apparatus magic, by the way, and these are things that I just went through it. You just did it. But then later on, you know what really got me? It was, I think when I got older, I really wanted to find a voice. What did I want to say? And there weren't too many tricks that really, or props that really felt right for this direction that I was going to. And Faust was really originally wasn't a magical character that I wanted to develop. It was a story, and everyone knows the old story of Faust, where he sells his soul to the devil, and I think it was written in the 16th century, somewhere around then. And it's a very classic piece of literature. But when I had read it, I looked at it in terms of his emotional experience. And I, at the time when I read it, I was going through cancer, and and I think I understood this sort of desperation that he was going through, and that attracted me to this character. And eventually, I realized I knew I couldn't write well, but I loved magic, and I thought to myself, maybe I can create a character where I can implement this character Faust and express this vulnerability, this desperation. I didn't know if I could do it, but that's how Faust kind of began. And one of the first pieces of magic that I ever started working on as Faust was the broken music box. And I think people will recognize that as a very classical piece where a doll rises up and down in your hand, and I put my own variation and turns to it. But I thought that piece, that magical piece, had meaning in the character, and I knew that was there to stay.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
think there's an irony, isn't there? And I don't necessarily mean this as a joke, but you found your voice in a mime character.
Yes, yes. It is ironic, and the thing about mime, I had always loved pantomime, Marcel Marceau, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton. I've always been attracted to these characters of the past. But for some reason, even though they didn't talk, their language, their body language really brought out emotion, and I connected with that, especially when I seen Marcel Marceau. Boy, I tell you, Dr. Likey, I had always laughed through Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, but when Marceau performed, I was moved. And I said to myself, if I ever were to learn this art, I want to move people in the way he did. And so I strive to do that with Faust. He had Bip. I have Faust, and I'll never become as great as good as he is, but his influence on me is so strong because it's so poetic and yet tragic. And I think I gravitated towards that sort of character where there's vulnerability, and going through cancer, circling back, I found vulnerability, and I think I was able to open up more and really find my voice in this silent character, ironically enough. But
Yes.
you know
Yes.
it spoke very loud for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. You bring so much joy, Chris, to so many people. And what I want to do is I want to start to wrap up,
Yep.
really as a means of teasing other people. You know, that old expression, leave them wanting more. And
Yes.
I'm excited to pursue this line of metaphysics and esoteria in
Yeah.
performance art a little bit more with you if you're willing to come back sometime.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That would be fabulous. How can people get in touch with you?
I'm on social media, so Facebook as Chris Herren as Faust. Also Instagram, I'm fairly active, Chris Herren as Faust. And then you can always look on my website and contact me through there. It's www.chrisherrenmagic.com. And I respond, and I'm very accessible. So please reach out and say hello.
Awesome. What a pleasure and an honor I want to say to play with you, because really
Yes.
there's a certain joy for me, I believe for you as well, in performing, in giving, in sharing. That's a new word I learned a few years ago from a very spiritual person that I know. He writes poetry as well.
Yeah.
And he said, rather than saying, I'm going to present this to you, or I'm going to give this to you, how about share?
Yes.
And that really resonated for me. And it probably resonates for you because
Absolutely.
we're sharing an art.
Yes. Dr. Liga, I think you summed it up best. In my thesis, the very first thing that we started talking about, I had always tried to use those terms, giving and sharing magic. And that's how I see magic. It's meant to be given as a gift to people.
Beautiful, beautiful. You're a gift, Chris.
Thank
And
you.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And I also want to thank all of you out there who joined us. I know you got a lot out of this today.
Absolutely.
Check out Chris Herren. Check him out at the Magic Castle and wherever he's performing, perhaps online as well. We'll see you all again really soon.